Okay, hello and welcome everybody. This is our final in the series of our webinars, and today we're going to be talking about all the lesser known features, the hidden gems of Farm QA is the goal of today, all the extras. So we've got a handful here. We'll see how far we get down the list. But we've got just a few things that are neat features that would be considered to be smaller in the grand scheme of our product, but we want to make sure we highlight those and make them available and make sure everybody knows of them. So a little recap, my name is Ben Munson. I'm the Senior Technology Specialist here at Farm QA, and I'll be walking you through today's webinar. A recap, so Farm QA, we build digital tools for agronomy. Started out with crop scouting, moved into recommendation, chemical rec writing, map layers, analytics is what we've been working on this year. We have those in place, and then as you can see where we're building in future years with the lower blocks in the pyramid there. So with that said, we will dive in to the extras and what that means to us. So we're going to dive into a live demo here of the product. And so as you can see, I've switched over into a demo account called Munson Farms. And the first item that we'll be walking through today is the yield estimator portion of our scouting template. In the first webinar, I showed the input to that, but I want to do a deeper dive and showcase how that gets set up, how you can then view that within analytics. So with that said, the corn yield estimator is what I'm referring to. And the way this works is within a scouting template. So I've gone into scouting templates, and now I'm within a template. This template is called corn, but it doesn't have to be that exact name. You can have it be in a different template called corn late season. The name of the template is irrelevant, and I've created a section within my template called yield. Again, this name of the section is not relevant. It happens to be yield, but it could be, you could change it to whatever you want. Now, the question itself, you can see what it looks like within the designer pane, but you can see it's got a child or a root of yield count, and then within there we have our sub questions. Now, in this case, the question's already set up. If it wasn't, we could do something like I will simulate here, which would be to create a new section, which I did by clicking the blue plus, the black plus button. I'm going to call this yield 2. Now I can add a question. The corn yield estimator is a unique question type, so all you have to do is select that as an option, and it will pre-build the question set within your template. What you need to do in this case is simply give it a name. So we will call this corn yield estimate. Now, from this view, we can drag our yield 2 question wherever we want. And so we could put this somewhere within the template, and then we could save this, and it would be part of your templates when you would go to the field to do an assessment. In my case, I'm going to clear this out just so I have one yield question, as you can see here. And a couple things that we can tweak within this is if you want to add what we call additional hints or text, you could say something to your other scouts, the other people that are inputting this data into Farm QA. You could say, you know, assess every 17.5 feet. Then with ear width, ear length, you can see we have ranges predefined. However, you can change everything you see here in the right-hand panel. In this case, we're saying our ear width is running between 8 and 24 kernels, but you could certainly adjust this to maybe run 5 to 25, for example, and set a default wherever that makes sense within your region of where you operate. Same thing could be said for the ear length, ear counts. The same numeric setup falls in here. We do default this to 34. Within a range of 10 to 50, but that can be changed. Note that when you do save, all these changes are going to get taken into account. The other thing that I have done here is I've set up metrics per individual question within this template, so that when I look in our analytics tab, which I'll do here in a minute, we can see the output of the ear length, ear width, etc., along with that end result of just the yield estimate. So that's all I've done within the setup side. We'll now walk through how we answer this question. So if I jump into our mobile application, I'm left with my map view. I can see all of my fields. What I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to jump over to the Fields tab, and you can see I already had corn sorted, but I'm going to search by corn, leaving me with just my corn fields. And what I'm going to do is I have a particular field that I want to scout, and it's actually called Wade's field. So I'm going to click on Wade's field. I now am visualizing the boundary. As we talked about in the previous webinar, if you walk throughout this field, you'd see your GPS coordinate. You could click this blue plus button. That's going to drop a GPS pin where you're standing. Let's say you wanted to do a yield estimate in the northwest corner. We could drop that GPS pin. We could add an observation. And now we note within this template, we've got that yield section available. So if I just simply, and this is what the question looks like within the app in real time, we can now click on it, which now exposes those sub questions, if you will, where we see ear width. If you recall, I had my default set to 16 for width and 30 set for length. But now from here, this is where I get the opportunity to come in and I can adjust and actually count with those ears of corn in front of me, the different both lengths, widths. The other thing to note within this is we default this to having 3 ears per, in this case, a 17.5-foot row. But if you prefer to do more ears, less ears, you can remove the question. So what I've done is you can reset the question, which I'll do here, which will remove it, or we can add additional ears in by clicking these plus buttons. So let's say we've actually got 4 ears of corn that we're assessing. I'll click this, so now we get 4 sliders available to us. Now I will answer these, and if I continue to move down to the questionnaire, we see ear count, and this is essentially our plant population. As you can see, it's assessing 1/1000th of an acre, and we can adjust this as seen here. Kernels per bushel output, this is roughly assessing the kernel size, or how many kernels it would take to make 1 bushel, but you can adjust this as well. Now, once all this is answered, all we have to do is, if we back out, we see that the calculation has been done, that the yield estimate in this case would be 248 bushels per acre. Now, if we want to continue on and say that's the assessment in the northwest corner, we could move on to do that again in maybe the east side of the field. And I will just do some really quick numbers here for the sake of the report. And then again, I will do this in the southwest corner so I can get a full report of 3 assessments here. Now, when I submit this, the data will get pushed back into our web portal, or we can immediately push this into a PDF from the scouting tab, and then clicking on that report I just generated. You can see my previous webinar on how we do that in more detail. Within our web view, I'm going to discard my template changes. Within our web view, we see that report that I just generated for Wade's field showing up at the top. I click into that to see the details of what this report looks like. And keep in mind that I did 3 assessments in this field, so you'll see 3 pins displayed, each with yield estimate values available. I'll bounce back in here to get it to load. Then from here, I'll also talk through the metrics or analytics side of how this data will appear as well. So again, you remember the northwest corner, southwest, I was on the east side as well. You can actually click on these pins to see which value corresponds, and you can see the data highlighting, the cells highlighting in the center. But clearly the higher yield is the northwest corner, lower yield southwest, and then we automatically provide you with an average so you can be seeing that value. Now, talking about how this flows into analytics, you notice because I set this up as a metric, I see a little icon to the right, which I can click on. Now, in this case, there's only 1 yield estimate that I've done. If I had done this over time, you would see a trend line of where this has come. Maybe you assess yield for 3 to 4 weeks leading up to harvest, you'd be able to see those trends. Now, if we want to look at this particular use case of yield data across all cornfields, this is where we can use that analytics tab, which I talked about in the previous webinar. What I'm going to do in this case is I will group this by crop, so I'll just drag this crop column to the top, and now I'm going to search to just view my cornfields. Now from this view, I'm only interested in looking at a few of the outputs, and so I'm going to have the field and the crop be columns, but then I really just care about this yield data for this particular view. What you see now is each row is being represented by a field. We see all the inputs that I entered in for each of my fields, my ear counts, my lengths, widths, and then I'm going to actually drag my actual output here, the yield count in the end. I want to see that here on the left-hand side. So I can be dragging that around to see yield count. And now what I can do is, I'm actually going to turn off the crop really quick. What I can do is I can sort this to see which fields have the highest yield, the lowest yields, etc. And now I can see this field 231, it's at the top, it's a 309 bushels per acre yield estimate. And then the Wade's field, which I did as part of our example, you can see that averaged value in here as well. So this is where you can see the content, and then if you're looking for maybe the discrepancy in maybe the ears were very uniform and similar versus maybe you have a larger spread between the ear counts and lengths, you can see the individual values listed out here as well. So we can view the data that way, and then the other thing that we could get into would be a spatial view of this, and this would be a scenario where we could look at, if we come into yield, we could look at our yield counts, and as far as crops go, I just want to see corn, so I could select just my corn fields in this case. And now what we should get is, if we go to a field averages map, we get a value which would be the yield count across the fields and when I did those assessments. So week by week, if you were assessing each of your fields, you get a color represented in each of those fields where you did the assessment. So you can see here this is an average of 166 represented by that green output. So that is the yield estimator from start to finish as far as the setup goes, the entry on the mobile side, and then the output. If we want to go to PDF, we could do that, which would look similar to our in-view or in-app view of the data as well. Continuing on, I want to shift over. We want to talk about navigation. So this is a feature where, again, it's a smaller feature in the grand scheme of what FarmQA offers, but there is a significant value from a customer base in this function. So what I mean by this is it's really twofold. One is that we can set field entrances per field, and then what we can do from there is we can navigate. So what I've done is I've clicked in, I'm actually going to click in this field 49, and if I zoom in on this, you can see the boundary, but if I go to edit the boundary in field 49, you can see my options up here, which is the interface I use to create the boundary. But in this case, I know my field entrance is over here on the west side of the field. So I can simply click set entrance, click on that boundary, save the field. Now that entrance will be saved within FarmQA as a geomarker. So what I can do with that data is a couple things. What you're seeing now is a representation of all the field entrances, and I've turned that on within this point section of the map details, so we can see holistically where all of our field entrances are, and that would do a couple things. It's allowing us to see which fields don't have entrances set. You can see where entrances are on more of a global scale. But from this view, you can also click on an entrance. You can remove it or route to. Now, the more practical use case for this function is within the mobile application. So in the same sense that we created a field entrance for that field 49, we can view that on the mobile app. We do auto sync, but because I just added that layer, I'm going to do a sync so we can see this in real time. Click on field 49. Now we can see the entrance that I had set on the west side of the field, but now we're on a mobile application. So picture this as maybe a newly hired scout or an agronomist or a truck driver doing deliveries. Even on a grower level, you could have your truck drivers delivering to a piling site, to a co-op, to an elevator, etc. And they could be using this to get between locations, and more specifically to an entrance besides just the field itself. So if I want to, I can also delineate these on the mobile app. So if I click the three 3 horizontal dots in the app, I get a set entrance option where I can simply click where the entrance needs to go. Now the real value is now when you do a route to option, it's pulling up your default navigation program on your device. It's going to provide your current location, and now you get a view of whatever program that you use. You get the functionality that comes with the turn-by-turn directions, and you can be hands-off at this point to get to that field entrance. So this is the navigation function that is available to users within FarmQA. The next thing that we did want to cover was a couple specific things that can be done around the scouting app and merging reports and working with map drawings. So if I click into settings, the administrator of an account has a few toggle options that they can adjust. So within settings, the organization tab, I can view within here that there's a scouting section. Now what this allows me to do is I can turn on this feature that's targeting the ability to merge scouting reports on the same field. So what I want to showcase is I'm going to turn this on. Now as a user, I can actually set that window in which things will be auto merged. So by default it's 24 hours, but I could go to 48 hours if that was more logical in my operation. So once that's done, it will auto save and we'll take those preferences. Now I'm going to showcase what this looks like, but at a high level what this does is if you have multiple scouts going to a field, they can all be submitting reports within the FarmQA mobile app, and they will merge together and appear as one report to the end user, to the agronomist. The other use case to this might be if you are a single agronomist and you've checked the field, and maybe the next day you come back to complete the assessment, or if you forgot to add something, you can quickly submit a second report, and it will look as if it was one report to begin with. So those are 2 use cases, but the functionality is we turn that on within the settings side. Now what I will do is I'm going to go into my scouting application, and I'm going to be working from field 117. So I'm going to search for that field in the list view. This is a spring wheat field, and now let's say as a scouting team, we're going to divide and conquer. We might have 2 different scouts running in this field, and one's going to maybe hit the west half, one will be in the east half. So what that looks like for us is if I click on the west half, and I'm just going to put in some rough data here, and let's just say we're looking at, let's say aphids, and then I'm doing a weed assessment for thistles. And we're going to move down, and we're going to, I'll put this more on the west side, and we're going to answer this for the first scout 2 different times. Now if I submit this report, and now what I'll do is I'll go in that same field again and submit a second report. So if I go to 117, and now this is simulating as if I was that second scout who was operating on the east side of the field, I can now do the same thing, but let's just say that the aphid pressure is high, but the thistle pressure is low on this east side. So what we'll see in the end is we'll see 4 points, even though I did this as 2 different scouts on 2 totally different devices. The other thing to note too is the scouts can be one could be on an Android, one can be on an iPhone. These reports will still merge together. That the device is irrelevant from the merge perspective. So now I will submit this second report, and now we can immediately again see this on the mobile application, pull this up, and it would generate as one report. But I will showcase this as if we're back on the web view. So again, report list view, we see this field 117 being displayed, but when I click on it, we can see that I have 4 observations coming from 2 different scouts. So I did the west portion of the field and the east portion of the field, and we can see the correspondence of, like I was saying, the high aphid pressure was on the east side of the field, but low thistle counts. So again, it's very hands-off in the sense that once that setting is toggled on, those reports will auto merge, and you can be efficient with the multiple scouts in the field scenario, or simply submitting as an individual different reports throughout a different time period. So that's the merge function. something in a very similar vein to that concept would be how we can display map drawings as map layers. And so what I mean by that is within the same settings organization tab and within the scouting section, we've added in an option to use a map layer to show drawings from scouting reports. And what I've done here is I get a drop-down list of all my available map layers. And I've actually already set up a map layer for scouting drawings. But if I go into an account that doesn't have that set up, just to make sure this is clear how it gets created, I'm going to create a map layer, and we're going to call this scouting drawings. Now, I want this to be a time-based layer because I'll be showing data week over week. So I'm going to save this layer. Now what I'll do is within that organization tab where I just was, I will showcase that this now shows up as a selectable map layer called Scouting Drawings. And the name itself of Scouting Drawings, it can be whatever you want to call it. Now this is set up and will auto-generate map layer inputs once we do notations on fields. So what that means is I'll go back in the scouting application, and in this case I will go to field 65. And what I'll be doing at this point is I will click in the field, and we're going to go through the workflow as if I was scouting. And in my case, we'll just continue on with this concept of aphids. But let's say we did an assessment. Once we answer this question, we get these 3 vertical dots. And what this allows us to do, and you would see this in more detail in the first webinar, but we can draw on the map. So this allows us to notate, and this is similar functionality to likely what you've seen before in the product, but we can use any of these tools as far as the pins, our circle tool, the polygon tool. One trick with this is that you can freehand, and then we also have a line tool. So these would be things like showing the route you walked in the field, maybe just dropping pins of hot spots of aphid pressure, or if you had a higher concentration in the southeast corner, you could delineate that. So that's the process of drawing the map layer, and that's an older or an existing function. What I want to show today is now when we submit this, it's going to act the same on the web view, but what we can do is go back in, and I will, well, first of all, we can see that this report submitted, so you can see field 65, that report is in the system. But now what I'll do is I'll actually search the map view, and we will be able to see this field 65. I'm going to turn off my field entrances. But now when I click on the field and view under layers, so this is going back to our map layer concept, you'll see that scouting drawing is an option. And now you see those notations that I made in the scouting app show up as a map layer. And not only that, but they are time-based layers. So I've done a couple different drawings and delineated things throughout the previous week. So if we're looking at aphid pressure, yeah, this is week over week what those notations are looking like. So if you want to notate things as far as pressure over time, maybe you start with 5 concentrations and you spray, but you miss 2. You can always see where those are through time by using that as a layer. Now, the other thing to note is with any map layer, we can come in and we can see this on the mobile app as well. So if I turn on my scouting, oh, that's scouting locations. Let's see, we should be able to come in here. Let's see if I can sync that as a layer. So within layer sync preferences, yep, so I didn't have that turned on. So if I turn on the scouting drawings, then I can resync, or it will auto sync actually, and then I should see those drawings as a map layer in the mobile application. So in that case, what I did there is I had not pulled down that layer to be displayed, but now we can see this on the mobile application, and we could slide back through time if we had a greater range set within the layer preferences. Okay, so that I can showcase here. If we do bump this up to sync days, it'd be 60 days instead. I think that should encompass a second drawing for me. Just to showcase that in that field 65. So if we go back in and view this layer, no, that wasn't a great enough time period. We would see a time slider across the top where I could adjust that to see the drawings over time, similar to what I was doing with this slider at the bottom of the map view. So that's the drawing functionality. Continuing on, I did want to show a few basic functions that we have in the field grid that I did not show in previous demos. So this would be the Fields tab within the web view. From here, we have a couple different things to show. So what we have is the group by options, and this is something that you could use to group by crop, or you can go to a further delineation of varieties. So you can see here, these are all my varieties listed out, and I could search based on any one of these varieties. So if I did search AAC Concord, that's going to snap down and we will just see that variety here. The other thing I wanted to show is that if we can have a secondary filters, if you will. So I'm going to group by crop, but now within here, I want to search or sort on variety as well. I can hit the shift key, and now I see that acts as a secondary filter. And so that's essentially going to group, you can see all these DeKalb varieties grouped together and the Thunder varieties grouped together as well. So that's what that's providing to us as a secondary filter. Now, some other basic things here is we can clean this up. So if we want to get more of a concentrated view of what we're looking at here, we can adjust the columns. We can also remove columns altogether. So if we wanted to get to a specific view where perhaps we were looking at just the planting information and days after planted, we can clean that up. And now this is a report that you could generate, send this out to maybe internally, back to growers, etc., where you can see the planted column here representing when things were planted. We could sort by this to see which fields were planted first or latest. And once we get to this view, we have the opportunity to export this to Excel. So what this will provide to us is something, again, that we could send out to a customer, something internal, or you can manipulate this further. So if you want to simply be looking at your acres or do some roll-up of those acres, you could run a pivot table on this data to get certain outputs. But you can see from this view here is what I was referencing before, being the corn fields and their varieties, number of acres planted, and when they were planted. So you can generate different reports that way. The same thing would go for if we wanted harvest dates, days after planting reports. We could also search this down to corn, and now if I exported, I would just get a corn export. We do have some actions we can take here. So if I bring back in the harvest dates, you can see I haven't populated that for most of my fields, but that's where I can take action here. So I knew 3 of these fields were harvested on the same day. I can come in here, I have the action toolbar at the top right, and if I click on my harvest dates, I can enter that in, maybe I harvested November 1st, and those would populate with the actual harvest dates here. Now, we also have our event logs. So we can click on over on the right-hand side and get a record of everything we did in this field, this Farm 1 East, and we can see all the scouting reports, recommendations. You could filter this by event category, and then you can also generate this to a PDF by clicking export to PDF from this view. The other common use case I really like this field list for is for crop planning. So from a perspective of we're in 2021 as a season right now, but if I wanted to come in and click 2022, this is where I've already done some of my assignments. But what we can do is, let's say we duplicated the growing season, and I know that all of my corn fields are going to soybeans next year. I can search on corn, I can do a select all, and now I can be assigning these in bulk to soybeans. And if I want to get more specific, this is also where I get my variety drop down, and I could be assigning all those cornfields to specific soybean varieties, and it would take that crop assignment. Then you could view it on the map view spatially. You could get acre total roll-ups, that sort of thing. And then we're not limiting you to one futuristic season. You could set up a 23 season, 24 season, and be building it off that way as far as crop planning. So that is one handy way to do that. And again, the values, you can be working back and forth with clients, or if you're a grower, you can be seeing this and manipulating it in real time. The other thing that we can do is you can group this by organization. And what we mean by that in our case is this organizational tree, as you can see here. You define the number of branches within this organizational unit, and then whatever you classify here can be shown as different units within our field list view. And again, this is where you can do subgroupings based on variety within here. The other thing to note is that if you are breaking this down, and I will unselect my fields, but each one of these columns you can search. So we have the ability, now that I'm on, actually we'll go over to maybe acres. So now you can see things like show me all of my fields that are larger than 150 acres. So now you're seeing that just those fields that are larger, and we could then group this by crops. So now I'm dealing with my beet fields that are anything over a 150 acres. So there's those types of filters, and then you could also break this down if it's just a flat out search for a particular variety. You could go say it contains and do BTS for a beet variety, and now it'll find all my BTS varieties within the within that variety column. The last thing is you can delete fields here. So if you need to clean up what a season, or if we talked through that scenario like I mentioned before of creating new seasons, we can delete fields or unassign crops to fields within this view by selecting, and then we could unassign up here if nothing's being planted or if it's essentially fallow, or we can actually delete out that field from the season, and that can be done from this right-hand column. So I think we're out of time here, but those are a few things that I wanted to point out. We do have one other thing I was hoping to cover was voice to text. We do have that in the mobile application where you can click the microphone button within a text box and you can speak to the app and it will notate what you were saying. We'll create another video on that, which we can share. We're going to continue to do these webinars going forward, hopefully around new releases, new functionality, but this will always be referring back to some of our base functionality in these webinars. I do want to open up for questions at this point, and we can address anything that anybody has questions on. Otherwise, like I said, we will have future webinar series going forward, and we hope to be in touch with anybody who has questions or interest in the product. Thanks for tuning in.